and Dr. Pagan will, as always, give you a wonderful talk. I'm Dan Finley, I'm the director here at the museum, and welcome to our wonderful facilities. We have had, of course, a lot of big news around here over the last few weeks. So we just can't tell you how thankful we are to the Siglers and to all the people who have helped support the campaign across the street. We are going to be breaking ground on January 27th over there. So we're very excited about that. We are officially the Sigler Museum already. So Chuck, your name badge is out of date. I've got my new one on already. Just today, this is the very first day. I'm test driving my new Sigler Museum name badge. So we've got a lot of great things happening around here. It really couldn't be much better as far as museums go. Today we want to talk about our exhibit that we have in the main building called Why We Serve. But before we do that, I want to ask a couple of people to come on up and say a few words. Mrs. Clark, would you talk a little bit about membership, please?
I'd be happy to. Become a member if you're not already. Thank you all for your annual membership. It is very helpful in supporting these programs that we do each year, and kids programs as well that we do. But I have a little bit more of a fun, first things first though. We're breaking ground in January, but we're continuing to fundraise because of a bit of increased construction costs. So we're going to continue fundraising for that. But exciting times ahead for sure. Next week, next Wednesday, we have a Second Chance art sale opening up here. It'll be here in the Learning Center. And if you collect art, or if you don't collect art, or if you're curious about it, I think it would be really something good for you to come see the sale opportunities. We will have about 50 pieces for sale, and this, this collection is from various donors that want to give back and maybe clean out a little bit, clean their walls out for future purchases. But we have been collecting some really great pieces, so it'll be in here. You can see in person opening the 19th at 10 a.m. when the museum opens, but you can also see it online. It'll be on our website, westermuseum.org. You can see the pieces and bid as well. The sale goes through December 2nd, but you can do opt for a buy it now option if you would like that piece right away. if you don't want to wait for it. But if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you, as well as any membership questions. But everyone here is a member, so thank you again. Enjoy the show. Nathan, I'd be happy to. Nathan is our new education manager. Nathan Wentz, is that correct? Hailing from Utah. And I'll let him finish the rest. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I just have a couple of quick announcements. I wrote them down real quick. On this Saturday, we have the Los Senores Horse and Home Show going on from 9 to 4. It's around town and pretty neat show. You can get tickets at lossenores.org. I was also going to mention the art sale. I think it's online as well. Can't be done on the website.
WesternMuseum.org.
Right, so westernmuseum.org, you can bid there or come here. And Friday, December 5th, we have our first Fridays as usual. We also have that night a members trivia night at 5:30. So that's exciting. And then Saturday the 6th is the Cowboy Poetry Night that is complete with a Cowboy Santa photo wall. So don't forget about that. That's all.
Thank you, Nathan. Just one other couple of quick announcements. Around the room, you notice all these beautiful bronzes. Those are done by one artist. His name is is John Coleman, and he's probably the best living sculptor, Western sculpture that there is. And we're delighted to have all these pieces here for about 1 year. So do take your time, look at all of them, and tell your friends about them. Secondly, behind me, and we haven't done anything official with these yet, but we have some 15 native ancient pottery, mostly Hopi, but 1 or 2 other tribes that are represented there. And this collection came to us as a donation from an incredible man. His name is Dr. Alan Cook, and he's been collecting these for his entire life, but he's getting up there and he wanted to give them all a good home. So by all means, take a look at those, and I'm going to tease you with something. And that is, one of these pieces is not authentic. It's a forgery. And the quick story there is, Dr. Cook bought it, and he's an expert, thinking it was the real thing. And through some research and examination, it turned out it wasn't authentic. And you know probably enough about art that there are always been forgers. And this was made as an attempt to sell it to someone for a lot of money. It really wasn't worth hardly anything at all. So we thought we'd actually leave it in here to be able to tell that story about how art is still forged and people try to scam other people with it. So your job is to find it, okay? So when you get a chance, take a look for it. All right, without further ado, this is Armistice Day. Celebrates the end of the Great War, not World War I, but the Great War, because back then there wasn't a World War II. So it was always referred to as the Great War. Obviously, that's now morphed into Veterans Day, that we celebrate the contributions of all veterans in service to their country. So it's very appropriate today that we have a presentation on our exhibition that's up in the other building, which you all are welcome to go see, called Why We Serve, which is about how Native American people have served in the armed forces over the years. So without further ado, I'm going to give you Dr. Eduardo Pagan to tell us all about it.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, thank you. So, a couple of things. First of all, can I just express my jealousy of the Sigler family? The reason I'm saying that is that they have a name. I'm thinking like Dan has a surname, Kathy has a surname that would be appropriate on any kind of facility, but for a name like Pagan, people would see it like Pagan, right? And it would just pass all the wrong kinds of, yeah, but I thought about it. I'd love to have a building or something named after me, but I would run around calling it the Pagan or something like that. So I guess I'm out of luck on that one. Let me just say one thing about World War I. Dan mentioned that. I just want to mention this very quickly as we're talking about that. We'll talk briefly about World War I here as well. World War I, it's so interesting, is it so, of our generation, the post-World War II generation, certainly growing up in the Cold War, World War II is still accessible. Certainly parents, grandparents served in that conflict. And so for us, our frame of reference when we think of global conflicts, World War II, for a very good reason, it was the largest global conflict. But before that, in World War I, if you read the literature coming in the 1920s, World War I had a significant impact across the world on everything, and virtually everything, on culture, on economy, on society. World War I, it's estimated 14 million deaths as a result of World War I. This was the first mechanized war that the world had ever seen. And the ripple effect after the war was over, a lot of assessment by nations about what was this all about, why did we fight, why did so many people die. There was really, it wasn't like World War II where there was clear, Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan, clearly there was a reason to stop what was happening. World War I is a little different. But after World War I, countries fell, kingdoms fell, empires fell that existed in the previous generation. All of the values of the Victorian era were thrown out the window. So you might remember the Roaring Twenties, the F. Scott Fitzgerald series as well, This Side of Paradise, some of those things. he wrote about that generation that was kind of characterized as a lost generation. People who no longer subscribed to the values of their parents' generation, their grandparents' generation. They were going to eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we're going to die. I mean, it was just this enormous period of just throwing everything off. The flapper, for example, if you remember again 1920s fashion, the flapper was complete rejection of the Victorian clothing of women. If you remember, they had the large bustles and they were covered from neck to foot as well, large dresses. I mean, there was a complete rejection of all the values of the previous generation because the younger generation, those who had fought in World War I, saw no reason to hold on to the values of the Victorian period. It produced World War I, this massive devastation of life. And people in the 20s of that decade felt lost, absolutely lost. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that's a very fascinating study. So what I want to talk about today is this exhibition, Why We Serve. And it might be a very interesting statement to begin with, why we serve. It's actually a question. Now, the question is not in the exhibition, but it starts the question of why we serve. And the question is this: why do American Indians, men and women, why do they serve in the American Armed Forces? And I think you would understand why such a question. If you know the basic elements of American history, you know that this land at one time was occupied by American Indians, often treaties that were settled, broken, warfare, disease, poverty, all these kinds of things. So I think it's a reasonable question to ask, why would American Indians serve in proportionally larger numbers than other populations, right? Why would they serve? So that's what I want to do. So very quickly, this is what I want to do with this presentation. So we're going to talk about indigenous peoples, and that's just a very large term to talk about certainly American Indians, but the indigenous people are the native people to the Americas before Europeans came. So of course that includes Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians as well, and how they've served in the U.S. military since the Revolutionary War. A lot of people don't know that, but it's kind of interesting. So, again, this is the question that put together this exhibition as the Smithsonian attempted to kind of talk about the military experience. Why serve a country that overran their homeland, suppressed their cultures, and confined many to reservations? So, this is my aim today. I want to examine how Native people served, why they served, and what their legacy means today. So with that, this is what we're going to do for our historical span. We're going to go from before the American Revolution to present-day conflicts, which is pretty much situated in the Middle East. And so I want to go over very quickly some key conflicts you'll be familiar with: the American Revolution, Civil War, Spanish War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and the recent Middle East. You know, I thought about this too as I was walking up to this learning center. I should have flashed a picture of my father up there, just to honor him. He served during the Korean conflict. And I didn't think to do that, but I just want to acknowledge this as well. He served during the Korean conflict, as did, I'm sure like many of the grandparents that served in World War I, World War II, cousins and uncles in Vietnam, and even my nephew just finished his military service in the Navy. So we have a very proud military tradition in my family as well. So let's talk a little bit about motivations. And it's, as you think about it, the motivations that American Indians shared, they were common with many Americans. Some of them were motivated by patriotism, absolutely. I'll share with you a story about Ira Hayes, who's from Arizona, World War II. Excuse me, you'll recognize his picture when I share that with you. He was motivated by patriotism. He grew up in Akimeawatu, in Sacaton, which is, I'll show you a map where that is, south of here. Some of them were they wanted adventure in their lives. They wanted to get off the reservation, get away from home, just like everyone else. Some of them sought educational opportunities, employment opportunities. Many of them were just simply drafted like everyone else. So again, the reasons for service vary quite a bit, just like most Americans. But there is a cultural significance too as we explore this question. We need to acknowledge that for some tribal communities, they had stated treaty obligations to serve the United States when needed. Some of them felt their own duty to defend their homeland. They understood, for example, that if Nazi Germany won, their situation would be a lot worse than what it was already, right? I mean, they certainly understood what was at conflict, and they felt the need to protect not only their homeland, the United States, but also their native communities. Now, one of the things that this exhibition seeks to nuance is really this idea about the warrior tradition. I think most Americans have this idea that American Indians across the board, all the cultures, all the different nations, had a warrior tradition. That's actually not true. There were some that absolutely did have a warrior tradition. I'll explain that in just a moment, but it's far more complex. There are many nations that were pacifists. They didn't have warriors, they didn't need to. So if you think about the California coast, for example, they were fishermen, right? That's how they supplied themselves. They didn't need to have a warrior tradition. Other places, absolutely. And there were some native people that resisted military service, for cultural reasons as well. The other thing I want to say about the warrior tradition is that when you explore, I would say that kind of in the American imagination, when Americans generally think about American Indians, they think about Midwestern native communities, Lakota, for example, or Dakota, Pawnee. And they certainly do. As I'm thinking about the Lakota people, they certainly had a warrior tradition, but it was different than you might think about. So they had, how would I characterize them? They had elite defense forces, the Lakota, and they were called the Dog Warriors. Let me explain a little bit about that. Now, the reason why they were called Dog Warriors, again, understanding that in modern English to call someone a dog is not a positive thing. But if you understand with the native culture, a dog was your best friend. A dog was very necessary. Many of you have animals, little fur babies, you understand what they mean to you as well. So it was dog in that sense. Loyal, brave, they were not going to leave you, right? I mean, this is what they sought to invoke by creating this kind of dog warrior society. The dog warriors, to become a dog warrior, they had to distinguish themselves in selfless service to the community. Not necessarily their skill of shooting bow and arrow or throwing a lance, selfless service. So if there were widows, for example, or if there were children that needed help, these were the ones who would gather the firewood and make sure that the widows had what they needed. They would provide for them food, things of that nature. So they first distinguished themselves by their selfless service to community. And once they distinguished themselves, they were allowed into the Dog Warrior Society. One of the things, I don't have a picture of that here. You may have seen them, but we don't have a representation here. But one of the things that distinguished them, the way that you knew that they were Dog Warriors, they had a red sash tied around their waist. And then the two ends of the sash went all the way down to the ground and dragged on the ground. So you've ever seen representations of native warriors, and they have this long, trailing red sash. These are Dog Warriors. The reason why they had this is that they were, the Marines often characterize themselves as the tip of the spear, right? In other words, first ones out there. The Dog Warriors were, in many ways, the first ones out and the last ones to leave if they were under attack. And their job, with their arrows and their quill, they saved two sacred arrows that had been set apart, that had been consecrated. And the first arrow, when they took up position, the first arrow went right into one of the ends of the sash. It was a way of physically tying yourself to the ground, which meant we're not moving from here. We're not giving 1 inch, right? Now the last arrow, of course, was this is when they knew they were going to die. But that's what they would do. So they would literally just fasten themselves to the ground, and they would stand and they would fight to defend their communities. Again, that sense of selflessness to the community, self-sacrifice was very important. So it's not, again, as we think about warrior, necessarily in skill in fighting, which of course it was over time, but it was more than that. It was this kind of selflessness for those that had this kind of warrior tradition as well. So with that, let's just do a very brief history of native service. And this might be very interesting and very surprising for some, but American Indians have been involved in American conflicts, even before America was America, if you understand what I'm saying. Before the United States existed, native nations fought with European nations. So if you go all the way back to the French and Indian War, they certainly fought in that. And these are precursors to the American Revolution, by the way. The French and Indian War coincided with the 7 Years' War. Very, very quickly, it was the world war of its day, the 7 Years' War. War involved nations across the globe. The colonial empires, England, France, Spain, fighting each other, and all their colonial possessions fighting one another as well, which is part of the reason why we had the French and Indian War. This was simply the American theater of this larger war, where the French allied with the Indians and vice versa, but also the Indians in North America allied with the British and fought against each other. In some ways, it was a very large civil war. Anyway, this moves on into the American Revolutionary War from 75 to 83. And yes, American Indians fought in the Revolutionary War as well. And I want to focus in on the Oneida community because they're considered to be the strongest supporters of the American Revolutionaries. So the Oneida, if you're not familiar with the upstate New York, this is, of course, you'll see Lake Ontario here. This is the Finger Lakes District, again, if you're familiar with upstate New York. These are the different tribes that made their home here. The Mohawk up there, the Oneida over there, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Wendat right there. So we're talking about the people that live just west, just east of the Finger Lakes area. So to begin with, it was the Oneida that actually brought corn to George Washington's troops while they were in Valley Forge starving and taught them how to cook corn. So the Oneida supplied them with food. So imagine this, they, as British and as colonists, they didn't know how to eat corn at all. In fact, I find this interesting if you travel abroad. In many parts of the globe right now, even now, right, in 2025, corn is what you feed your animals, right? They don't eat corn like we eat corn, right? And this is directly from native traditions. So the Oneida also provided warriors, scouts, spies. They rounded up any kind of deserters for the Americans. And I want to focus in on this particular battle. And in particular, a husband, wife, and child in this battle. So you'll read this, if you want to go back, the Pennsylvania Journal and Weekly Advertiser in September of 1777. You'll read this article, this thing right here. And it says, a friendly Indian with his wife and son who distinguished themselves remarkably on the occasion. The Indian killed 9 of the enemy, British, by the way, when having received a ball through his wrist that disabled him from using his gun, he then fought with his tomahawk. So he's wounded and now he's just hacking away at people, right? His son killed 2 and his wife on horseback fought by his side with pistols during the whole action, which lasted 6 hours. So this is a representation of that actual conflict. So this husband and wife team here, I want to focus in a little bit more to tell you their story. His name, one of his names was Han Yeti, right? Now he was born with an Oneida name, which I will not try and pronounce right now. He who takes up the snowshoe. He had a Dutch name as well, which is Han Yeti Dokstadter. And so Americans just called him Han Yeri. And he was actually commissioned as a captain in the American Army during the Revolutionary War, and he led, his forces were a combination of Oneida warriors and colonial militia, and they fought against loyalists and their Haudenosaunee allies as well. So this is a representation of Han Yeri. What happened in that particular battle was his wife, this is the Battle of Oriskany, his wife, and again I will not attempt to pronounce that name, she was known in English as either Sarah Montour or Sarah Martin. Her birthday was 2 kettles together. She, armed with pistols, rode into battle alongside her husband and her son Cornelius as well. And she helped load his musket because he couldn't anymore. One arm, one hand had been shot, by the way. So she helped load his musket, and that's what you're seeing represented right here. So this is just an example of one Native American group that supported the Americans and fought in that conflict. Now let's move forward in time. I'm skipping over the War of 1812. The reason I'm doing that is that most of the Native communities in what is now the United States in 1812 sided with the British. And you might wonder why. It's because the British were smart enough to say, look, if you help us defeat these Americans, we'll give you your land back. Now, I don't think they were actually going to do that, but a lot of Native communities then sided with the British. So, the Civil War, let's skip forward to that. It's estimated that about 20,000 American Indian soldiers fought on both sides of the conflict. Now, if you take a look at this map, of course, you'll recognize the southern states along with southern nations. By and large, the southern nations tended to side with the Confederacy and the northern nations tended to fight with the Union. allied with the Union nations as well. So the Union, the Delaware, the Creek, the Seminole, Kickapoo, Seneca, and so on. The Confederacy, the 5 civilized tribes, as they were called, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Muskegee, Chickasaw, Seminole. And many of them fought to protect their territory. And they accepted the promises that both sides made, that their autonomy would be guaranteed after the conflict. If you're wondering, why did they fight? So, the Union formed native regiments like the 1st Michigan Sharpshooters. This is an actual photograph of the 1st Michigan Sharpshooters. And American Indian soldiers, they fought in several key battles: Manassas and Antietam, Spotsylvania, Pea Ridge, Gettysburg, and Cold Harbor, which is, all of these were vicious, vicious battles, but they fought. In the Confederacy, some of them actually achieved pretty high rank. So on the Confederate side, Confederate States of America, this is General Stan Waddy. He was Cherokee. He was actually the last Confederate general to surrender in that war. So he achieved very high rank. On the Union side, no one achieved higher rank than Eli S. Parker. He was Seneca, and this was his birth name as well, Hasanawanda. And he was later named Donahagawa, and it was largely, this is an honorific name for the role that he held. I've got his highest position listed, I believe he's a brigadier general. Let's see what I've got listed here. But again, just to give you an idea, he himself was Seneca, so right over there, again, in the Finger Lakes area to the west of the Finger Lakes. That's where he came from. This is a picture of General Ulysses Grant right here in the hat. This, right here, is Eli Parker. He was part of the command staff of General Grant. Here's another picture right here. You can see Ulysses Grant in the middle, and there's Eli Parker to the left. He was responsible for a series of firsts for American Indians. He earned an engineering degree in college. He worked on the Erie Canal and other infrastructure projects that were underway before the war. He was commissioned as a captain during the Civil War. The story is that he wanted to fight for the Union. He wanted to defend the Union. He first proposed gathering together a platoon of American Indian soldiers, and he was turned down by the governor of New York. He then tried to enlist, and he was turned down again. The reason why he was turned down was the argument was, you're not an American citizen, we can't take you. He happened to be personal friends with Ulysses Grant before Ulysses Grant became the Ulysses Grant, you understand. He was simply a general at that time. He wasn't the head of all the Union forces, and he petitioned his friend to allow him to become a military officer. So he was commissioned as a captain as a result of his relationship with Ulysses Grant. He then went on to become an adjutant and secretary to General Grant. He actually wrote, now this is Eli Parker, Seneca, actually wrote the final draft of the Confederate surrender terms at Appomattox. He was there in the living room with everybody else. He wrote the final draft. He became a brevet brigadier general, and then later on, after the war, he was appointed the first American Indian Commissioner of Indian Affairs. So nobody ranked higher than him in terms of American Indian participation. Now with that, let's move to the post-Civil War, into the Indian Wars as well. Some of you might remember General Crook Trail, if I remember correctly. This is State Route 260 that goes along the Mogollon Rim, if you've been up there. General Crook, so this is a picture of General Crook right there in the middle. What I find interesting about him is that you notice his kind of Egyptian, I don't know what to call that hat, but it's not a regulation military hat. He favored this kind of Egyptian, I don't know, protection hat. And also, for those of you who know your equine animals, what kind of horse is that? It's a mule. Thank you so much. Yes, it is not a horse, it's a mule. And because they were considered to be far more sure-footed in the rugged terrain of Arizona. So this is a picture of him with his Indian allies who often served as scouts. So here's a representation of Indian scouts. You'll see them there. My best guess is it's probably Al Sieber, famed leader of the Indian Scouts, over to the left. Now, the thing I want to say though is that, again, here in Arizona, when we think of Indian Scouts, we think of the Apache Scouts, the Western Apache, which is true. But there were so many more Native communities that participated as scouts for the American military, East and West. So I just want to point out that on the East Coast there, the Narragansett, which is over in the Massachusetts area, the Mohegan, Massachusetts, Connecticut area, the Kiowa, Arikara, way up in the Michigan area, if I remember correctly, Seminole down in Florida, Navajo, of course, Tonawatha here in Arizona, Pawnee Crow, even Inuit, Eskimo, served, right, as scouts for the military. So wherever the American military was, they often sought to have Native Scouts all across the nation. Now, 16 of them received a Medal of Honor because of their bravery. And this was an observation by the Pawnee Scout leader, Luther North. He said this: neither the wild tribes nor the government Indian Scouts ever adopted any of the white soldiers' tactics. They thought their own much better. So that was part of it. In fact, I'll even go back and say that General Crook, one of his innovations was when Geronimo broke out of the San Carlos Reservation in eastern Arizona, and he broke out about 4 times, the American troops could not find him. They were too skilled in crossing the Arizona terrain, going into Mexico as well. They knew the trails too well. Even when the American troops tried to set up a blockade, knowing that Geronimo and his people were headed down to Mexico, they slipped by. And finally, Crook realized the only way to catch Apaches is to get other Apaches to help him. And so that was really his innovation, was to get Apache Scouts in the Arizona theater as well. Now, it does represent some complexities. This is an image of Apache Scouts here in Arizona. Often, in order to get Apache Scouts to work with you, I mean, he understood their rivalries that existed, and there certainly were ancient rivalries between Apache clans. And so he was able then to get people to serve with the U.S. military to hunt their rivals who were off gallivanting across the American West. Sometimes Apache Scouts served simply because they needed the food, honestly. Their families needed the food as well. So to this day, when you speak to different Apaches up on the reservation, either White Mountain or the San Carlos, it's a complicated picture. They don't often look back at the Apache Scouts with great pride. Some do, some don't. Some remember more that their cousins were forced to hunt their cousins, if that makes sense, right? And so it is a complicated picture when it comes to that as well. So, but let's move forward to the Spanish-American War. This is a picture of William Pollock. He was Pawnee, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, Pawnee were in the Nebraska area. Nebraska, Kansas area as well. This is William Pollock actually wrote with Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders. In fact, you'll see him there in uniform right there. This is another picture from the Theodore Roosevelt collection in the Library of Congress of this particular soldier. And he was an artist. And this is the only known, people who wrote about William Pollock said a couple things. He was one of the bravest soldiers there ever was. And he was always drawing and painting. Those are the 2 things they said. He was steady on his feet. There's one account from Theodore Roosevelt that when they were under fire in Cuba, and everybody took cover, as you can imagine, not him. He just took up position behind a tree and just kept firing at it. He just was as brave as could be. But this is the only known painting from William Pollock, and it is at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And and so there's a picture of, now Buffalo Bill's name is there too, who may have helped with this. But yeah, there's no date. And so it's believed to be the only known picture of him. Now let's skip forward to World War I. As I mentioned before, there are many American Indians that served in a variety of capacities. This picture here is actually a picture of what was known as telephone squads. These were the forerunners to the code talkers. In fact, they were code talkers. So again, here in Arizona, you often hear about the Navajo code talkers, which we should. But the code talkers during World War I and also during World War II were much bigger than just the Navajos. So many different Native communities sent their sons to fight, and they formed their own code and served as code talkers depending on where they were. So this very dark map, I apologize, it was lighter on my computer, but there's a map of the United States, if you can barely make this out, and these are the different tribal communities that had code talkers that served during World War I. So you see the Cherokee over here, the Ho-Chunk, Cheyenne, the Sioux, Cheyenne down here, the Comanche, Osage, Cherokee, and Choctaw as well. Obviously not American or Navajo or Apache, because at that time they were not being drafted. But these were the original code talkers during World War I. Now, World War II, as I said before, we often think about the Navajo code talkers for good reason. But in World War II, their roles expanded significantly and played a very, very key role in the Pacific Theater as well. And so this is another map which shows you World War II code talkers, and now we see the southwestern tribes like the Acoma, the Lagoon in New Mexico, the Hopi, the Pima Apache as well. Now, clearly they spoke their own native language, and so if I were a code talker, I'd have to be talking to someone else who spoke my own native language. So they couldn't speak across each other. That's just a phenomenon of American Indians. So the Mohawk can't speak to the Pima and the Apache. So you have to understand that these home communities created their own networks of code talkers as well. I want to talk to you about the Alamo Scouts. You may know about the Alamo Scouts. A lot of people don't. The Alamo Scouts came out of the Pacific Theater, and it was the idea of General Walter Kruger, and he needed intelligence, the Pacific Theater, up-to-date, reliable intelligence during World War II. And so he fought volunteers who were willing, first of all, volunteers. Secondly, they were willing to go deep within enemy lines, or behind enemy lines, to get information about the troop strengths, numbers, the unit types, any information about their locations and destinations as well. And this is an actual picture of, drawing up like General Douglas MacArthur. And he's meeting with some of these Alamo Scouts, and they were Pima native, Pawnee, Pima's Akimilwatan, Navajo, Alamo Scouts. So you see the picture here with General MacArthur. They performed 110 missions behind enemy lines in New Guinea and the Philippines. They liberated over 500 POWs, captured 84 Japanese combatants, and the Alamo Scouts were the forerunners to special operations that we have today. And again, it was largely because of Native American contribution to the American military. Even the Inuit up in Alaska, and also in Native Hawaiians, they served. This is a picture of Inuit inductees that are being sworn into service in Alaska, the Territorial Guard. There were 6,300 Alaska Natives who patrolled the Alaska coast during World War II. And I should say afterwards as well. I'll just insert this very quickly. My father, part of his Korean service, after he served in Korea, he was stationed in Alaska. And it was during the time, as you can imagine, Korean War, 1951 to 53, memory serves correctly, there was a great concern that Russia might invade Alaska. And so my father served in Alaska as part of that effort just to protect that particular state. Native Hawaiians also served a similar purpose in the Hawaiian Islands as well. Now, as we're talking about World War II, I want to talk about Ira Hamilton Hayes. He's probably the most famous American Indian, at least in Arizona, in terms of World War II service. You all know this picture, considered to be the greatest picture taken of the period. This is Ira Hayes right here. So this is Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. Just to tell you very, very quickly, Iwo Jima was a flat volcanic island. So imagine in your mind, it's kind of like ovular in shape. It's just this oval. Everything is flat, with the exception of Mount Suribachi. It's the highest geographical formation there. And it was terrible fighting in Iwo Jima, terrible fighting. Part of the reason why was because this island had been mined by the Japanese before the outbreak of World War II for sulfur. So the whole island was sulfuric. The smell was overwhelming, just of sulfur to begin with. They mined it for decades, so there were tunnels all throughout this particular island. When the Japanese knew that the Americans were getting close and the Americans were island hopping, they trained their weapons for kill zones with the expectations the Americans would storm the beach. And so a lot of Americans, they just walked right into these kill zones that had been set up. So the Japanese had a lot of time to prepare to protect that particular island. They did it with the other islands as well. And as I've talked to veterans about this who served in Iwo Jima, they described the sand. The sand was not like the sand you might find in the California coast. You're all familiar with that fine-grained sand. The sand they described was much more like kernels of corn, much bigger. And what that meant was that every time you dug a hole out, it would just fill in. So what that meant was there was absolutely no protection. When you stormed on the beach and you tried to dig a foxhole, there was nothing. It was a devastating scene. So you kind of get a sense of how flat the island when you look is or was or is to this day when you look back here. So Mount Suribachi, this was within, I think, about the third day, if I remember correctly, that the Marines finally made it up there with Navy as well, and put that flag up. There were two flags that were raised. This is the first one, and then the second one is the one that you can find right there. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Ira Hayes, though. So he was born in Sakaton, and so we're up here, Wickenburg up there, and this is where he was born. So Casa Grande is over here, Florence, Gibbs Clean Creek. This is Sakaton on the Gila River Indian Reservation. He attended the Phoenix Indian School. He was a good student, by the way. And when Pearl Harbor was bombed, he felt such a sense of patriotism that he talked about joining the Marines. He wanted to be a Marine. He wanted to fight on behalf of the United States. He didn't. So he served in the Pacific Theater. After raising the flag, this picture became very, very famous. He was pulled out of Iwo Jima. He was pulled out of combat and was placed along with the other soldiers who survived. I think 3 of the 5 were killed within weeks after the flag raising. They went around the nation raising money, right, for the war effort. And so now he becomes this celebrity, this kid from small town Arizona on the reservation, now becomes this national celebrity. That transition from combat zone to suddenly ticker tape parades and being interviewed on the radio and things like that was very difficult for him. He had undiagnosed PTSD, as many soldiers did, combat veterans. And even just the pressures of speaking on behalf of his comrades when he knew that others had killed, and others, he felt others were far more deserving. He was an alcoholic, like many other veterans. He turned to alcohol. He had this to say one time. He said, "I was sick," speaking about his drinking. "I guess I was about to crack up thinking about all my good buddies. They were better men than me, and they're not coming back." So again, he really wrestled with fame. He wrestled with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress, untreated post-traumatic stress, and he died at a relatively young age. But if you go out to Sakaton to this day, you will find this life-size statue, a bronze statue that is erected to his memory. Now, we're still talking about World War II. I want to just bridge over from World War II to the Korean conflict because there's another person I want to tell you about. Woodrow Wilson Keeble. He was Dakota. This guy was amazing. So again, World War II. Let me tell you about Keeble. So before he was drafted, or he was recruited by the Chicago White Sox, and when his unit was called up into active duty, and so his unit was 164th Infantry. They landed on Guadalcanal, another island that was a kill zone. And these are just pictures of just the carnage, as you can imagine. Now, his particular roles, he carried a Browning automatic rifle. And he had a pitching arm. Now, I should say this very carefully. So he had a pitching arm. He was a very, very good pitcher. This comes into play in just a moment. But I want to say that with caution because my father always told me that you don't throw a grenade. And so for those of you who have experience with this as well, he always said you don't throw a grenade, you lob it. This is how you control it this way, right? But the reason I'm bringing this up is that because of his skill, he had very good hand-eye coordination. So even in lobbing, he was renowned for putting that grenade right in the hole where it needed to go. If you understand what I'm saying, right? Not everyone could do it this way, but this comes into play in just a moment, his abilities to do that. So, but he was tremendously accurate. So, one of his friends, who was a Sioux, James Fenelon, who fought with Keeble on Guadalcanal, he said this later, he said the safest place to be was right next to Woody. He was a fierce, fierce fighter. So you can imagine with that BAR, that R, and also they just throwing that grenade with great, great precision. His unit received the Navy Presidential Citation for their support of the Marines. So that's World War II. So he goes home, and then his unit is reactivated for the Korean War, 164. They're reactivated. He goes back into the military, and at the time, the commanding officer of that unit pulled together his men, and he needed to have sergeants out in the field, out in combat. And so what he decided to do was, this commanding officer, was the fairest thing to do was to have him draw straws. And Keeble steps forward, he says, "I volunteer." And he was asked, why? Why are you volunteering? He just said, somebody has to teach these kids how to fight. So he went and he became a master sergeant. And during the Operation Nomad Polar is when he earned the Medal of Honor. And it was posthumously awarded, I should tell you, but this is the action that actually earned him the Medal of Honor. So in 1951, this was the last major offensive of the war. It's known as Operation Nomad Polar, excuse me. And so the objective was that there were supply routes that kept the Chinese troops supplied, and there was these steep mountains that protected the supply depot that the Chinese occupied as well. So the objective of his unit was to take these mountains and deny that coverage to the Chinese. So on the 15th of October, and again on the 17th, 18th, and 20th, he was wounded, right? Just 4 days, 4 different days he was wounded. He had 2 gunshot wounds to his left arm. He had grenade shrapnel to his face that almost took his nose off. And he had a badly twisted knee. The doctors removed 83 pieces of shrapnel from him. And he was advised to stay back and recuperate, and he said, nope, my boys are not going up without me. So he went back there to lead his men. And he was posthumously awarded, oh, by the way, let me tell you the story then. So he goes back, just imagine this guy all bandaged up, right? He goes back and he leads his men. There were 3 different assaults on the mountain. They were repulsed 3 different times. Because he realized they couldn't do it. There were 3 different pillboxes as well that were keeping them pinned down. So by himself, he takes grenades and he takes his bar and he crawls up the steep end of the mountain on the left side. And he crawls within distance of one of the pillboxes, fires into the slot, the opening, and then this is where his aim comes into play. Lobs a grenade inside, takes out one. He crawls all the way around to the other side, does the same thing, fires into the little slit, throws the grenade right into the hole, and takes him out. And then finally did the same thing with the third one as well, by himself. He did all of that. So this is the action that actually earned him the Medal of Honor posthumously. At the time, he received the Silver Star with 1 Bronze Oak Leaf, and these are all the other decorations he received. I won't read them all. But he was awarded finally, years and years later. This is a picture of his descendants in the White House. And his stepson, Russell Hawkins, said this: we're all extremely proud that Woody is finally receiving this honor. He epitomizes our Dakota cultural values of humility, compassion, bravery, strength, and honor. So let's move forward to Vietnam, and there's one more story I want to share with you, and then we'll move to the post-Vietnam era, and I'll share with you the last story. So it's estimated that 1 in 4 eligible Native men served in Vietnam, compared to about 1 in 12 non-Natives. So a high percentage of Native men served in Vietnam. Many were drafted, but a large number volunteered, often for family or tribal traditions of service. It's estimated that 41.8% served in the infantry units, about a quarter served in airborne or artillery units as well. 232 Native Americans died in the Vietnam War and are listed in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is the story I want to tell you about. This is Sergeant Billy Walkabout. He's Cherokee. He's the most decorated American Indian during the Vietnam War. He was with the Army Ranger 101st Airborne, storied 101st Airborne. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his heroic actions outside of Hue in November of 1968. And the story goes that as his unit, as the helicopters would come to extract his unit, they came under fire. And so he immediately charged forward and began laying down cover fire so that the men on the ground could get up on the helicopter. And some of the wounded were being treated by medics on the ground as well. As they were firing back and forth, even the medics became wounded, and so he ran back, treated the medics, patched them up as best he could, ran out again, laid down covering fire, and he was the last one to be extracted from that place. And so these were the heroic actions outside of Hue in 1968. The National Native American Vietnam Veterans Memorial can be found in Neillsville, Wisconsin. Now, I've not found out why Neillsville, Wisconsin was chosen for that, but there it is. And you can see that representation of a Native soldier with that staff, that war staff. Now, let's move on to the post-Vietnam Wars, and I want to tell you about Lori Pius. She was also an Arizona girl. She was born of a Hopi father and a Mexican-American mother in Tuba City. Again, if you've not been up there, Tuba City's in the north, let me think for example, for a second, northeast corner of Arizona, Four Corners area of Arizona. It's on the Navajo reservation, even though she herself is Hopi. And she came from a military tradition as well. Her grandfather served in World War II and father served in Vietnam. And here's the story. She was assigned to the Army's 507th Maintenance Company. And as she was on a particular convoy in Iraq in March of 2003, what happened was that their convoy came under fire. And so immediately she stepped on the accelerator trying to avoid enemy fire, which she did, but then a rocket propeller grenade blasted in the back end of her Humvee and then threw it into the back end of a tractor trailer that had been in front of her. So they were kind of sandwiched, if you will. There were 3 women in that Humvee: Lori Piestewa, Shohana Johnson, if I remember her name correctly, and Jessica Lynch. Some of you might remember who she was as well. The 3 of them survived the crash with varying injuries, very significant, by the way. There were 3 other soldiers that died in the Humvee. And the 3 women soldiers were taken prisoner. There were 4 other soldiers that were also taken prisoner. Lori Piestewa, it seems that she had a traumatic brain injury. She was conscious but not alert, if that makes sense, and she died in captivity. She became the first American Indian woman killed in combat, and this is a picture of her friend, Jessica Lynch, over to the left right there. And this is Lori Piestewa with her father up to the right, and her 2 children right there. She was part of this long, long tradition of Native women's service as well, and I want to acknowledge this, because this is also important. And I'm sure you know this, that in World War II, World War I, women served in those conflicts all the way back to the Civil War. In fact, everywhere, now that I'm thinking about it, women have also served, but often in support services. And Native women were also part of it, into that long story. So, back to this question that the Smithsonian kind of poses as a paradox. Why serve a nation with a history of broken treaties and suppression? So here are a few takeaways just for today. So there's a long history of alliances that Native communities have had with the federal government in terms of fighting together as allies. Just to give you a sense of a few statistical highlights of World War II, out of the Native population in World War II, so we're saying 1940-41, of about 350,000, 45,000 enlisted. So if you think about the percentages, that's pretty high. Since 9/11, about 90% of American Indians have committed to the armed forces, versus about 14% of other ethnicities. So again, there's this higher service or tradition of service among American Indian communities. Now, as we said before, not all motivations are strictly cultural or strictly patriotic. Certainly in the modern time period and economic considerations, educational opportunities, job security, they all play important roles. Even just getting out of small towns and seeing the world, right? But you have to also acknowledge that for some communities, the warrior tradition, it exists, but it exists in very nuanced ways. It was not a universal ideal for all American Indians. Now, with this, I will end, I think this is my final slide, maybe one after this. This I found was a very moving picture. These are 4 Native women in traditional dress. This is a Vietnam memorial in Washington, D.C. And if you see on their back, is a representation of the 4 different branches of the military. Their hands are on the memorial, honoring the fallen of American Indians, but all the fallen in general. So military service for American Indians has had a variety of impacts. It's certainly a sense of honor and community recognition. If you ever go to the reservation, particularly on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, many families are very proud to display their service. Very, very proud to display their service. Many of them benefited through educational opportunities through the GI Bill, employment as well, employment benefits through GI Bill. So it has been a benefit. But there's still ongoing issues, as with many veteran communities as well. Post-traumatic stress, reintegration, cultural healing that comes from just the complexities that come with that. So with that, I will end. And that's the end of this presentation. There we go. All right. Yeah. So thank you very much. And any questions before we break up? If not,